Hi everybody, I'm Susan Mulvihill. Well, I'm pretty excited today because the topic is seed starting. I absolutely love being able to grow my own plants from seeds. So today I've got all kinds of information to share with you. I've got some great resources to help you out, and we're going to go through the whole process. I even asked my folks on Facebook what they wanted to know, and those will be incorporated into the video as well. And this will probably be the first in a series of videos about seed starting because there's so much to talk about. Now you've probably seen my high-tech seed storage box before. It's just an empty canning jar box, and I've got all my cool season crops here, warm season, and flower seeds. Now there are a couple of reasons that it's really important to be able to start your own plants from seeds. The first one is that it's a very important skill to have. You should be able to grow plants from seeds very easily, and I'm happy to tell you it's not a hard process. The other thing is that because of the pandemic, it seems like it's getting harder and harder to find plants in nurseries. It also can be a challenge to get seeds, but also when you go to a nursery, sometimes they'll have a pretty limited selection of different types of plants you can buy with different varieties of each of them. And so when you can start your own plants from seeds, it opens up a whole new world to you because you can try all sorts of different varieties. One thing I want to emphasize is that seed packets are a wealth of information. And most of the seed companies do a really great job of giving you the information you need so that you'll be successful. And the information on there is particularly helpful if you're brand new to seed starting or to vegetable gardening or flower gardening. Here's an example of the information you would find on a seed packet. Now this one actually even tells you to plant these seeds between April and June in a sunny location. Plant the seeds an inch deep, and then it tells you how much to space the seeds apart or rows apart if that's applicable in your garden, how many days it takes the seeds to germinate or sprout, and the days to harvest. Now days to harvest and days to maturity are the exact same thing, and it refers to how long it takes a plant to produce a mature fruit. So for example, pumpkins, winter squash, melons, tomatoes, peppers, all of these things that need quite a long season to grow. So if you live in a short season like I do, the days to harvest or days to maturity information is really important because you need to know that you have enough frost-free days to grow a crop in. So be sure to take a look at that information on a seed packet for the types of crops that take longer to mature, and make sure you have enough time. And that also means being very familiar with what your weather is in your region so that you know how many frost-free days you have. So from the last spring frost to the first fall frost. Okay, I'm up in my office now because I told you at the beginning that I have some resources to share with you. And they're all on my website, susansinthegarden.com. So I wanted to show you those next because they should really be a big help for you in getting started with planting things from seed. You'll notice there is the guides menu, and that's where I put a whole bunch of resources that I've created to help you out with all kinds of things related to gardening. If you go down alphabetically, you'll notice there's the seed starting scheduler, and that's actually what I have on the screen right now. So here is a red link. That's for a downloadable file. It's a chart that you can print out and use it to list the seeds you want to start. You'll calculate when you want to start them, when you would want to move them out into your garden, and you can make some notes to yourself and so on. A lot of people have said this is really helpful. It's really simple, but it is something that will help you start your seeds and stay on track. A lot of people have told me they're unsure when to start vegetable seeds. And of course, I can't give you exact dates because we're all in different areas, right? So I'm in a colder area. I probably start a lot of plants a lot later than you might if you lived in the South, let's say. So what I did to fix that is I created two different charts. This one says seed starting, when to plant vegetables, all zones, so it applies to anywhere, and seed starting, when to plant vegetables, and that's for zones 5 and 6. Now I'm in zone 5B, so that would work for me. So if you are also in zones 5 or 6, you could use this chart because I give you specific dates to start things. But for the all zones chart, and let me just pull it up here, what I've done is I've given you information on starting the most commonly grown crops, and those names are in the left column here. And then either whether you'd start them indoors or outdoors, or perhaps you might be able to do both. Certain vegetables do best if they're just planted directly into the garden. And then other ones you need to start ahead of time indoors. So just to give an example of both instances, here is beans, and that would be for pole beans or bush beans. Now I'm unusual. I start my beans indoors ahead of time, and that's because we have a lot of birds in our garden and they love to nibble on those seedlings. So if I start them indoors a couple of weeks before our last frost and then transplant them out into the garden, the seedlings are large enough to where they can fend for themselves. So what I've listed here is you can start them indoors 2 weeks prior to the last spring frost, and then transplant them after the danger of frost is past, or you can sow the seeds directly out in the garden once the danger of frost is past. Let me give you another example here. Carrots. You'll notice there's nothing in the indoors column because you really need to plant them directly in the garden rather than starting them indoors. So this chart, I think, should be really helpful. You can see it's quite long, and it will give you all sorts of ideas when to start yours. So if you do live in an area that gets frost, just know when the average last frost is, and then you can use that information accordingly. There are even more resources under the guides menu that relate to seed starting. So if you go down to seed viability, which is what I have on the screen at the moment, this will let you know what the basic shelf life of vegetable seeds is. And what that means is how long seeds will give you a good germination or sprouting rate. So you might be alarmed to see that onions, parsley, and parsnips only have a shelf life of a year. And I can really testify to that, especially with parsnips, because once the seeds are more than a year old, boy, they don't want to germinate. And then look at lettuce, 6 years. Cantaloupes, cucumbers, and radishes, 5 years. So this will give you an idea of whether or not your seeds will still be viable. Now I have a trick I want to show you so that you can test your seeds, and we'll do that in a couple of minutes. But this little chart should be helpful as you go through your seed packets. You should be able to look and see, okay, how old are these seeds and are they worth saving? Now that said, I have to admit, seeds are viable for a lot longer than we give them credit for. So don't throw them out, just test them ahead of time and then decide if you're going to use them or not. Okay, I've got 2 more resources for you when it comes to vegetable gardening and seed starting. If you go a little farther down on this menu, you'll see vegetable plant families, and that is a chart that will show you which plants are in the same plant family. This is helpful information because sometimes there are certain damaging pests that just target a specific vegetable plant family. And so if you know who's related to whom, that makes it easier to know if you need to take steps as far as damage control and prevention especially. So I just wanted to point that out. And then the last guide that I wanted to show you is vegetable planting. And this one is a general guide to starting vegetables. I've got the names of the crops on the left planting depth, how much to space the plants apart, how much to space the rows, a general guide on how long it takes the seeds to germinate or sprout, a rough idea of days to maturity. Of course, that can really vary with the variety, but it gives you an idea. And then whether it's a warm season crop or a cool season crop. So be sure to check all of those out because they're there for you. Now, before we continue with seed starting, I just wanted to give you a friendly reminder that I have a brand new book coming out, the Vegetable Garden Pest Handbook. I wrote it for all levels of gardeners, from beginner to master gardener. This will help you identify both the good bugs and the bad bugs in your garden and provide you with all sorts of methods for dealing with the bad ones using effective organic controls. This is going to be such a great resource. If you pre-order it now, you will receive special bonus material that is not in the book and can't be found elsewhere. It contains my best tips for growing your favorite veggies and some that you might not have thought of growing. All you have to do is order it from your bookstore or preferred online source and email me your order confirmation. My email address is susan@susansinthegarden.com. Then I'll send you a link to the bonus material. This is a great deal. Okay, let's get back to seed starting. I promised I'd show you how to do a seed viability test so you know how well your seeds are going to germinate. And it's so easy, you're not going to believe it. You start out with a pre-moistened paper towel and then place 10 seeds onto it. Wrap them up in the paper towel. Very simple. And then you're just going to put the paper towel inside a baggie that you can seal. So there's that. The next thing you want to do is mark the date that you began your seed viability test so that you can keep track of the days. And then you're going to put this baggie somewhere that is about 70 degrees Fahrenheit. So that might be a sunny windowsill or maybe the top of your refrigerator. Just don't forget you put them there. And then in 7 days, you're going to take the paper towel out of the bag, open it up carefully, and see if your seeds have sprouted. And if it seems like not very many have, then I would roll it back up, put it back in the baggie, put it back in your warm place, and check it again on day 8. And then you're going to check it on day 9, and then on day 10. And that should be long enough to see what kind of viability you have. So the beauty of having 10 seeds for this test is that you can easily figure out what type of a percentage of germination you have. So if all 10 seeds germinate, which is awesome, you would have 100%. If you had 5 of the seeds germinate, that would be 50%. Now really, a 70% to 100% germination rate would be ideal, but at least you'll know how well your seeds are going to sprout. And then at that point you can decide, yeah, I'm happy with that germination rate, I'll go ahead and use them, or I'm not real crazy about the germination rate, but I don't have time to go buy more seeds, so I'll plant the seeds more thickly. Or you're going to go find more seeds. At the beginning of this video, I told you how I had polled my Facebook followers to ask them what sorts of questions did they have about seed starting. And so I thought we'd go through those right now. Then we'll look at the equipment you need for starting seeds and then go through the steps. So I thought a good starting point would be this question. Why start seeds indoors and which ones would I start? Well, first of all, the main reason you're going to start plants from seeds is to give them kind of a jump start before you transplant them out into the garden. Also, as I mentioned earlier, you can grow a lot of varieties that you can't find in nurseries and garden centers. So that's certainly an important reason. So what I would recommend is that you start seeds indoors for plants that need a bit of lead time to get them growing. So things like tomatoes, peppers, eggplants, broccoli, cabbage, other types of cabbage family crops. and maybe beans, peas, or corn. Now I start those indoors because we have a lot of birds. They want to nibble on those young seedlings, and so I'd rather get them up to about maybe 5 or 6 inches tall and then move them out to the garden where they can fend for themselves. Now you can start just about any seeds indoors, but you always want to check the seed packets because they will tell you if it's better to start them directly out in the garden. That's important. Also, regarding which ones don't transplant well, it's typically root crops, so things like carrots, parsnips, rutabagas, and turnips. Now, I used to think for a long time that you couldn't transplant beets. They're certainly a root crop. But my friend Joe Lampel says, yes, you can start them indoors and safely transplant them out into the garden. I haven't tried that yet, but I really need to. But the main thing is that root crops are a problem for transplanting because the tips of their roots can be damaged, and that will affect how well the roots develop. A few folks ask what the best type of soil is to use for starting seeds. The very best thing is seed starting mix, which is also known as germination mix. It's light, it's fluffy, it holds moisture well, and it's sterile. I have great success using that. The next best choice would be potting mix or potting soil, but do not choose one that has fertilizer in it already or those water-retaining polymers. Just get plain, simple potting soil. You do not want to use garden soil because it compacts easily, it's hard to keep moist, and it can contain disease pathogens, and that's not how you want to start off your poor little seedlings. Another person asked about fungus gnats. She wants to know what they are, how do they get there, and how do I deal with them. Fungus gnats are these tiny, annoying pests. They want to fly in your face, and they can come from some bags of potting soil, but more often than not, they're coming from your house plants, especially if you moved them outdoors for the summer months and then brought them back in the house. Usually what happens before you bring them back in is that a female fungus gnat will lay eggs in the soil of the house plant. The larvae hatch, and they can cause damage to plant roots, so that's the big concern. But they mostly feed on organic matter or fungus within the soil. It's not all that practical to do anything for your seedlings, but you can control them for your house plants using something like this. This is mosquito bits. I do not have stock in this company, but it contains something called BTI, which is Bacillus thuringiensis israelensis. And so what you do is you place a layer of these granules on the surface of your houseplant's potting soil, or you can mix it in a little bit. And when the larvae of the gnat hatch, they feed on the BTI and it kills them. So that's a possibility. But the other thing you can do for your seed starting area is you can either make or buy a sticky trap. I got these, it's a pack of about 10 from Gardens Alive. They're called pot stickers, and they are coated with some sticky substance, and right now they have a protective layer of plastic so that I don't get it on my fingers, but you just peel it off, hang it in the area. The fungus gnats, so the adults, are attracted to this yellow. They get stuck on there and die. So that is certainly a viable option. I had quite a few people ask me about damping off syndrome. They wanted to know what it is, what it does to their seedlings, and how to prevent it. And that's an excellent question because it is a horrible problem, and fortunately there is a very simple, inexpensive solution. So damping off is a fungus that kills seedlings very quickly. It can stem from not very good air circulation around the seedlings, and so it helps to have a fan that is lightly blowing across the seed trays. But the best way to prevent it is with something called finely milled sphagnum moss, which is another big mouthful of a name. But This is one brand of it. This is called No Damp Off. I don't have stock in this company either, but I think I should. So it is sphagnum moss. It's been ground down, so it's very fine. It is a natural product, so that's good. And it is so easy to use. I'll show it to you as we go through the steps for seed starting, but just briefly what I do is I sprinkle just the lightest layer of it on tops of the planted seed trays before I put the lid on and put it under a light. And that will naturally inhibit the fungus that causes damping off syndrome. Easy. The next question I want to address is when to use a seedling heat mat, and that's what this thing is. So most seed packets will tell you if some seeds need warmer temperatures than usual in order to germinate well. And what you do is you put this underneath your grow light and plug it in. You're going to place your planted seed tray directly on top of this, and the warmth from it will raise the temperature of your seed starting soil 10 to 20 degrees above the ambient temperature. So this works really well. It's very simple, but if you're starting seeds for something that really needs a dialed-in temperature, you can certainly purchase a thermostat. It has a little probe that goes into the potting soil or the seed starting mix, and then you can really dial in a specific temperature, so that's very helpful. When you use a seedling heat mat, you're going to leave it plugged in and warming that soil until the seeds have germinated. Then you can unplug it. So you want it plugged in 24/7 until your seeds have germinated. A few folks ask me what to use for fertilizing plants and how often to use it. So once your new seedlings have some true leaves, those are the mature form of the leaves rather than those initial seed leaves, that's when you would start fertilizing them. You want to use a liquid fertilizer that is high in nitrogen, and that is the first number on the label. I'm not recommending any particular brand, but the nitrogen is going to promote leafy green growth, and that's what you're looking for. But the important thing to remember is that those seedlings are little babies. And so instead of using the proportion that they recommend on the label, I would halve that. So if it says 1 tablespoon to a gallon of water, for example, you do half a tablespoon to a gallon of water. And that way you're not giving them too strong of a fertilizer when they're really young. I would recommend fertilizing them about every 7 to 10 days, but just keep an eye on the plants, see how they're growing. But the nitrogen will really help them get going. A few folks asked me to talk about different types of lights you can use for seed starting. And of course, it kind of depends on what your budget is and how much seed starting you're going to be doing. But we have used your basic fluorescent tubes. They've worked reasonably well. They don't last very long, and they also are not very energy efficient, but plants will grow with them. But the light that they emit does not promote plant growth as well as actual grow lights. So that's a difference right there. The grow lights are emitting a spectrum that the plants can better utilize in order to grow. LEDs are the most energy efficient lights you can use. You probably won't need to replace them, and so that really makes them the most cost effective. And they're certainly giving plants the light that they need in order to grow. You can also use a sunny windowsill. The seedlings will probably be a bit spindly, and you'll need to turn the containers they're in frequently because they're going to be leaning towards the sun. So it's doable, but your seedlings will probably not grow as well. We finally made it to the last question. What does it mean to harden off your seedlings? How do you do it? And are there ways around it for those of us who work full-time? That is a great question, and I do have a couple of suggestions for that. First of all, what is hardening off? That is a way to slowly help your plants acclimate to the intensity of the sunlight, which is much stronger than your grow lights, and also to the outdoor temperatures. And you're doing this for the week before you transplant them out into your garden. So the process is this. The first day, you move your plants outside into an area with filtered sunlight for 1 hour, and then you move them back indoors. The second day, you move them out for 2 hours and move them back inside. The third day, it's 3 hours, and then you move them back in. And each day, you're putting them where they'll get a little bit more sunlight, just so they get used to how bright that sun is. So the ideal is to do this for a week. I know that that is challenging sometimes. But here's a way you can get around it, and you're probably going to have to improvise a bit, but here's some suggestions. First of all, start the process on whatever your weekend is, following the directions I just gave for those first 2 days. At that point, move your plants outside each morning to a spot that is mostly shady, that gets some sun during the day. Maybe put them next to a wall or a structure that provides some shade for part of the day. So that would be a way you could get around the week-long process where you're gradually increasing the number of hours your seedlings are outdoors. So I hope that will help. Okay, I'm going to quickly go through some basic seed starting supplies just to give you some ideas. If you go to a garden center, you can buy what are called seedling flats. They do not have any drainage holes in the bottom, and that's fine, because then what you do is you purchase an insert that has different size cells in it, and they will have drainage holes in the bottom. So this is an example of one. It's got tall, narrow cells, and that works really great for something that has big roots. So something like beans, peas, corn, winter squash. And while we're talking about this, I wanted to point out this one. This is very similar, but way sturdier. I bought it from leevalley.com years ago. It has held up really well for me. And this is what I start my beans, peas, and corn in. But other examples of the types of sheets of inserts you can buy, they'll have 6 holes, 8 holes, 4 holes, 3 holes, and so on. And they're all perforated so you can break them apart. And that's why these are individual. But you can buy an insert that has all of them with this size hole, just to clarify. Now, another thing that I have done over the years is I have purchased a few heavy-duty trays, because they fit seedling flats and seedling inserts just fine. You can find them at garden centers and at greenhouse supply places online. They're really sturdy. They're going to cost more than your basic seedling flat, but really not by that much, and they're going to last way longer because these are pretty flimsy and so they can crack and break. Another thing you're going to need is a dome lid, and that is to increase the humidity while the seeds are germinating, and then you take it off once the majority of the seeds have sprouted. But there are other options, because you could certainly use a clear plastic bag and put it over the flat once it's planted, and that will also increase the humidity. And then again, you take it off once the majority of the seeds have germinated. Now let me show you a couple of other ideas. You can also find seed starting kits, and this is one that I got from Gardener's Supply a few years ago, and I love how sturdy it is. So it has a few components to it. First of all, in the bottom there is a tray, and this is a water reservoir. Then there is a little support platform, so you put that with the points facing down, and this is called a capillary mat. And what happens is, when you fill this with water and you pre-moisten this, you put one end of the capillary mat down into the water, and it wicks the water up to water your seedlings. So this is the planting tray. It has 24 cells to it. You'll notice there's holes in the bottom, which makes it really easy for the water to go up into the soil for the plant roots. And then there is a plastic dome lid that goes on the top. Now, when your seedlings are large enough that you either need to up pot them because it's too soon to put them out in the garden, or you're ready to transplant your seedlings out into the garden, what you do is you lift this up, remove the capillary mat, turn this platform so the points are facing up, and then you line up the points of the platform with the main holes in the bottom of the seedling tray and push down on them, and that pushes the little block of soil out, seedling and all, which is slick. So that's a possibility. Now, if you'd like to do something more DIY because you don't have any containers and they're just not accessible to you, then you might consider using either to-go containers or containers from the grocery store that held either produce or something else. And so this is a really nice one. It had mushrooms in it, and this one had tofu in it. And so all you would need to do is to make some holes in the bottom for drainage. Drainage is super important. You don't want the soil to be sopping wet. So that's something that you could do. And then you just would cover it either with a plastic bag or something else to increase the humidity so that the seeds will germinate. Now, one thing I should mention is that, I don't like to buy things in plastic. I don't like to promote the use of plastic. However, if this is something that you are going to buy anyway and you can repurpose it after you're done with it, then that at least makes it a little bit better. You're certainly going to need some type of a planting medium, and as I mentioned in the Q&A section, I really recommend using a germination mix, which is also referred to as a seed starting mix, or a very basic potting soil that doesn't have a lot of stuff added to it, such as fertilizer and those water retaining polymers. You just want basic seed starting mix or basic potting soil. And also from our Q&A, I would recommend picking up some finely milled sphagnum moss to prevent damping off syndrome. I bought this at our local garden center. It cost me $5.49 for 222 cubic inches. And this lasts a very long time. I probably will not need to buy another bag of this because you use so little. Now, you don't technically need a watering system for watering your seedlings, but I think I'd be in big trouble if I didn't mention this because so many people have gone nuts over this system. So this is just your basic pop bottle. And what I have is a screw-on mister top that delivers a fine mist to your seedlings. I bought these in a set a few years ago, and these work slick. They're very inexpensive. You can buy them in different size groups, and they last really well. So I do recommend this. It's very easy to find them. All you have to do is a web search on the words bottle top waterer, and you'll find all sorts of sources for them. Now, as I mentioned in the Q&A section, you're certainly going to need some type of a light source, and I thought you might be curious to know what I use. So this is the Stack and Grow system from Gardener's Supply, and I started out with the bottom level, and then the nice thing is that you can add on additional levels, and so that's what I ended up doing. I've got 3 now. It uses T5 LED lights, and they are adjustable as far as the height, and it's worked really well. So that's what I'll be using. And of course, you're going to need some seeds. Now today I'm going to be planting some different types of lettuce. And that's because I want to start some quite early since I have a method for planting them outdoors which involves using something called a cloche. So I want to get something ready to go so that as soon as it's safe, I can plant them outside. If you're curious how my germination test is going with those pea seeds, I wanted to give you a quick update. So far, 4 of the seeds have sprouted, so we're at 40%, but it's only been 4 days, so I'm going to let them go a few more days and see what I end up with because they're pretty old seeds, but if they germinate well, I'm going to use them. Okay, let's go through the steps for starting seeds, and then that's everything you need to know. Now we need to wait for the seeds to germinate. When the majority of them have sprouted, go ahead and remove the dome cover or the clear plastic bag that you had on them, because they don't need that high humidity anymore. But keep an eye on the soil moisture. Make sure that it stays lightly moist, not super dry, not sopping wet. Thanks so much for watching, everybody. I hope this was a helpful video. Let me know if you have any problems or questions, and I'll see you next week.